These pieces I found from the Rebbe on a Noahide's relationship to the study of Torah. Why I think this was interesting is, of course, we know that traditionally we say, well, Noahide shouldn't study Torah in the Gemara in connection to a non-Jew who's learning Torah. That if a non-Jew is involved in Torah concerning his 7 commandments, he's considered like the high priest. So that's like pretty high, pretty holy. How come he's becoming like a high priest? The Rebbe says because that's the power of Torah. Torah is so powerful that when the Noahide is studying what the Noahide should be studying in Torah, which is concerning his 7 laws, he is literally like the high priest. Where do we get this idea of the high priest? Because it says that Torah is more precious than pearls. Now, pearls in Hebrew is pninim. There's a little bit of a play on the Hebrew, so it might be hard to follow. Pninim is pearls, and the high priest on Yom Kippur, yesterday, if we had the temple, will go into the Holy of Holies, which going into, we would use the same word similar to the word pearls. There, it doesn't mean pearls, it means going within. Lifnai v'lifnim. So, again, if you maybe could hear it, lifnim, pninim is a very similar word. One was with a p, and one is with a f. Torah is comparable to the pninim, the pearls. The high priest goes lifnim on Yom Kippur when he goes into the Holy of Holies. So therefore, Torah brings you to the level of the high priest. So obviously, we understand when a Jew studies Torah, he could be on the level of high priest. And it says in the Talmud that when a non-Jew studies Torah, when he's studying the Torah that he should be studying, like his 7 laws, he's also on the level of the high priest, which shows us how enormously special Torah is and how much you have this ability to be lifted up by it. Now, a person could say, wait a minute, why is a non-Jew raised so high when he's studying Torah? Torah's not his at all. It says clearly, God gave Torah as an inheritance to the Jewish people. So if Torah is the inheritance of the Jewish people, of course we understand technically there are parts of Torah you can and should learn, but why is it impacting you so much? It's not your inheritance, so to speak. It's the Jews' inheritance. That's what someone could ask. But the Rebbe says it's very simple. If the non-Jews are commanded to keep the 7 laws, which they are, and if to keep the 7 laws you have to study to understand what the 7 laws are, which you do, obviously then you, the Noahide, has a relationship to that part of Torah. But you could say, wait a minute, no, why are we saying they have a relationship? It's just technical. You have a commandment, and therefore you got to study the laws to know what to do, but that doesn't mean you have a relationship to do it. If I got a car, got a mixer, got a computer, and I'm learning how to use it, I have a relationship with these things. It's practical. It's technical. It's functional. Doesn't mean I have an inner relationship. So why are we saying the Noahide has such a relationship with Torah that it elevates him to the level of Torah to be like the high priest? I mean, that's the highest and holiest of the whole Jewish nation as the high priest. Why is a Noahide so affected as if he had an intrinsic relationship to Torah? So the Rebbe says, but that's the power of Torah. That's how special Torah is. You have an obligation to keep the laws. Therefore, you've got to learn to know how to keep the laws. Therefore, you do have an intrinsic connection to Torah. Because God does want you to study Torah. How else are you supposed to keep his laws? So that part of Torah is yours. And it's Torah. And it's yours. And therefore, the advantages of Torah are also yours. And if Torah elevates a person to be like the high priest, you're elevated to be like the high priest when you study Torah. Or the Rebbe says you could look at it slightly different and say, okay, we could say innately a Noahide has no connection to Torah. It's the Jews. But innately you don't have a relationship, but since you have the laws, and to keep the laws, you got to study them, therefore you have a relationship. However you cut it, if you're saying, I have a relationship, or if you're saying, I didn't start off having a relationship, in the end of the day, I do have a relationship. And if the Torah is so powerful that it raises someone up to be on the level of the high priest, it raises you up to be on the level of the high priest. I thought this was fascinating because we know that in general, and this is from the Talmud is saying, no, Noahide shouldn't be studying Torah. And yet here the same Talmud is saying, when the Noahide studies Torah, he's like the high priest, talking about those parts of Torah that a Noahide is not supposed to study. But once we're talking about your area, what you're supposed to be studying, look how high you are elevated by studying. Look what an affirmation the Rebbe is giving here on how enormously powerful the study of Torah is in impacting the Noahide, just a Jew, also the Noahide. In another piece, 1985, the second piece, crown. The crown, of course, is the highest level. The crown is higher than your head, meaning your head is your intellect. That's what's involved in Torah, your intellect. But then there's the crown over that. And the Rebbe says the crown, just like the crown encompasses, encircles one's head, so the crown of Torah means Torah encompasses and encircles you. Like your total life is within Torah. Obviously, I know for some of you, that is how you live. You could be a Noahide and not live that way. One could be a Noahide and they make certain commitments and they have certain beliefs. And they could live sort of a regular life and keep the laws. But some of you, obviously, I know, go much, much further. And your whole life is within Torah. Your whole life is completely encompassed within Torah. And that's called possessing the crown of that. Torah encompasses, surrounds, embraces your entire life. Your whole life is swallowed within the reality of Torah. And it's actually interesting because Maimonides brings this out, and this is quoting, the crown of Torah is placed like out there so that no one could have an excuse. None of the people in the book could have an excuse and say, like, so to speak, oh, it's not fair. If we had the option to have the crown of Torah, we would have taken it. But hey, we don't have that option. God says, don't worry. The crown of Torah is out there. You want it? Go for it. This isn't just meant like so people could have an excuse and people could complain and people could say, oh, if you allowed us to have the crown of Torah, we would have taken her. So God says, no problem. I'm going to make it accessible. But the Rebbe says, if you understand what this is saying the crown of Torah is accessible. Meaning it's not just like, okay, I know you're going to have this complaint, so I'm removing your complaint. No, God's not playing games here. It's real. So again, this is an incredible thing the Rebbe is saying. Because the crown of Torah means such a high level of Torah, the crown, beyond, that our whole life is within the reality, within the paradigm of Torah. And the Rebbe says, based on this source, based on this original source, it's accessible for everyone, including every Noahide, including any non-Jew that wants it, that says, I want that crown of Torah. God says, it's accessible. Go for it, because that's such a high level. So again, the traditional thinking is a Noahide studying Torah. The Rebbe is saying, a Noahide could get the crown of Torah. It's out there for you. Go for it. You want it? Take it. God says you want it, take it. So obviously go for it, take it. This raises a whole new arena of how Jews have an obligation to bring Noahides, the non-Jewish world, closer to God. Because normally we think of it in a very functional way. Functional meaning bring a non-Jew to become a Noahide, to understand there's a God, to accept God, to discard any man-made foreign ideologies and theologies, and to keep the 7 laws, which again doesn't have to take that much of your life. You could keep a pretty regular life, just a more moral and ethical life than most people around you, but still a normal life, and keep the 7 laws. The Rebbe says, look what this source is saying. A Noahide could have the crown of Torah. Tell them about it. Open them up to it. Let them be aware of how much God is willing for the Noahide to be close to. Study the Torah. Let Torah encompass your life. Have your whole reality within Torah. Not just, I'm a Noahide, but my whole life is being a Noahide. And wear that crown of Torah. A Jew can wear it. You can wear it as well. How do you see that difference of the Noahide keeping the 7 laws versus the Noahide whose whole life is within Torah? Have you seen in yourself saying, oh yeah, I'm like this, or oh yeah, I'm like this, or the transition from one to the other, or seeing, I know there's a world of Noahides out there, all different types and stripes. How do you see this play out in your reality?
Well, I can see the fact that some Noahides are really, really dedicated, and some just want to do the 7 without going deeper, because there's a lot more. There's 60 or so, and even more than that, from what I understand. So some of it, and unfortunately, some of it's because they don't have the leadership to go deeper. But that's what I can see. And
how
unfortunately,
did you see it
because
with yourself, Dixie? Because Dixie, I would definitely view you as a person who's wearing that crown of Torah. So did you see with yourself that transition from, oh, God wants 7 laws. Oh, these laws make a lot of sense. These laws are, yeah, moral person. I mean, they're all very straightforward, to this point of no, God actually wants a lot more, or not that he wants a lot more, that God is willing for me to come a lot closer.
Well, I think the way, we were so involved with the Messianic, and then with the other people, that it was just starting to take off when we came in. So we were hungry for anything that we could find. And that's how we got to go closer and closer than most people do, because we were searching so hard that we were listening to everybody and, came across the right people. And so ours was a different way than most people came.
You're saying it wasn't like you found Noahides, started with the 7, and then said, wait, I'd like more. It was like you dove into, you fell into the deep end, like with your initiation.
Oh yeah, we were already searching. We were in the messianic group, but we were already above them by that. We couldn't figure out, they were still on the level of the messianics, not giving up JC where we had gave him up while we were in with them. We couldn't deal with that. So, we were already into doctrine to Torah pretty well by the time we went ahead and broke off.
Natalie, what were you going to say?
It very much like I feel like I'm on the front end where it's because we kind of right after our first trip to Israel, we kind of tried to dive in with both feet and bring a lot of the like Orthodox practices that we learned there home. And then the more we studied, the more it was like, well, don't adopt the Jewish customs, don't make your own religion, don't kind of wear the costume of Judaism, as I've kind of talked about it. So then it was like pulling back to say like, okay, I remember somebody saying, it's really easy to add something in, particularly with children. It's extremely difficult to take it back out. And so this was something that we've really, really, really just the babiest of baby steps. Do we add anything in? Because we don't want to have something in and then the kids get used to it and then we take it back out. We've seen that in friends of ours where like the poor kids, because they kind of jumped in with both feet, like at every stage, the kiddos, by the time they're adults, they just, they don't know which way is up.
So I hear what you're saying. So what the Rebbe is saying here, so what Natalie's saying, and this is what I think is a great important thing, I'm glad you raised this. The Rebbe is saying this isn't you're creating a new religion, like, you're crossed between whatever Jewish things you want to do and what the Noahide is supposed to do. The Rebbe is saying within those areas that you are allowed to study, as you study them and as you live them, Torah could completely embrace your life. That your whole
Yeah, that's great news.
Is within Torah. So it's not like, oh, I want to take on all this Jewish stuff. Oh, no, actually, I'm not supposed to take on this Jewish stuff. It's, as Dixie was saying, it's not a problem. A person could be aware of the idea of being a Noahide. It could resonate with them as true. They can reject or never have had a relationship with foreign, man-made religions. They could accept the truth of God. They could keep the 7 laws, and that's fine. And their life continues like a regular life, but they're, as I said, more moral and more ethical than people in this world. And they have a real relationship with God, and that's totally fine. It's not saying if a person doesn't have the crown of Torah, they're like, oh, they're, whatever, No, they're completely a Noahide. They're keeping the laws. But within being a Noahide, there could be this like passion and desire to have more of God. You just want God more. The Rebbe is saying here, as you study Torah, again, obviously only those areas you're supposed to be studying, Torah more and more impacts your mind, impacts your heart, impacts, and it becomes the prism through which you look at everything in life, and everything in life really becomes a God-centered choice. Is this how God would want me to behave or not? Is this how God wants me to behave or not? And then you just see more and more areas where you can bring him in, where his reality is affecting you. So you're absolutely right, 100%. You're not supposed to make up your own religion, which is whatever Judaism that I think I enjoy doing. No, of course not. But as a Noahide, the Rebbe is saying, literally, Torah could permeate your entire life. That literally your whole life, just like my whole life is obviously regulated by God, and every part of my life is part of God. There's nothing in I might not be doing it right, so maybe part of my life I'm not serving it properly. I don't mean to say I'm always doing it right, but everything in my life is, in the end of the day, a choice and an expression of my connection, or unfortunately my messing up my connection with God. There's no part of my life out of my relationship with God.
See, that's like probably my favorite part of Judaism. So the fact that that is an option for Noahides in a way, that's actually really exciting.
Yeah, I thought it was unbelievable. And the Rebbe was saying that's what it means, the crown of Torah. That Torah completely surrounds your life. that your whole life is within Torah. So if you're looking at it and saying, what parts of my life feel just secular, like nothing to do with God, in those parts I think, well, what does God want me as a Noahide to be doing? And maybe I need to study more his will to more naturally look at all these secular parts of my life and see that no, there's nothing secular. Everything is part of God. Everything. We say that by Mashiach, Isaiah says, the world will be full of the knowledge of God as water covers the sea. The idea being that the water completely covers the sea. There's a whole world under the sea that's just completely immersed in that water. So it's total immersion, completely drenched, completely saturated. The Rebbe is saying, when a Noahide is wearing that crown of Torah, this is an embodiment, the whole world being full of knowledge of God like water covers the sea. Because for the Noahide representing the world, his whole life is God if he's wearing that crown of Torah. This is, the Rebbe says also, this relates to the idea of Mashiach, because it says by Mashiach, the entire world will only have one desire, to know God. All mankind, the whole world. Knowledge of God. That will be our quest. That will be our desire. We'll just keep thinking, God, I want you. God, I want you. And how do I bring you more and more in my life? And that's true for all mankind. So for a Noahide, who's already wearing the crown of Torah now, he's living a messianic life. Because as I'm saying, a Noahide doesn't have to wear the crown of Torah. A Noahide could be a Noahide without wearing the crown of Torah. But a Noahide could wear the crown of Torah. And the more you study, the more it's natural. Just like, okay, I'm looking at a picture of Natalie now, because now I get to see her face and her beautiful child. So it looks to me like Natalie's covering her hair. So, oh, yeah, a little bit. So I had this discussion with Natalie, and she was talking again about
Playing another half and half.
yeah, not wanting to be just grabbing things of Judaism that she enjoys. I said, no, God actually wants you to cover your hair. That's God wants a Noahide woman to cover her hair. Doesn't have to. It says a pious Noahide woman will cover her hair. So that takes the learning to understand there is more, and and it's not all obligatory, but there are more and more ways if I want to embrace God, if I want more of God in my life. Or as Dixie said, we think of the 7, but then there's charity, there's honoring one's parents, there's trusting in God. Well, where exactly do they fall? So we'll show where they fall. But those might not be things we would think of naturally. But as we study Torah, we realize, but God wants a Noahide to give charity. That's very important for a Noahide. God wants a Noahide to honor parents. That's very important. God wants a Noahide to trust God. That's very important. God wants a Noahide to pray. Where in the 7 does it say prayer? Well, we'll show you where. We can, the sages discuss it. But God wants a Noahide to pray. So the more you study, the more you realize, I can have more and more and more of a relationship with God. I can be ultimately wearing that crown. It's not going to happen in a day. But as I study, and then more and more my life is embraced by Torah, I could be wearing that crown of Torah. And the Rebbe says when you wear that crown of Torah, that's living Mashiach. That's living redemption. Because by redemption, the entire world will be wearing that crown of Torah. The entire world will be focused on God, I want you. God, I want to know you. God, how do I make you more and more part of my world? Another piece from the Rebbe, also from 1985, where the Rebbe also speaks here again about the idea of the Noahide learning Torah and saying obviously anything connected to the 7 laws is something the Noahide can and should learn. Be things that you might not think of directly as in the 7 laws, but as we were just mentioning, there are things that God wants you to do, like honoring your parents. You might say, where is it in the 7 laws? But it's there, and God wants you to do it. So that's also something you're supposed to be learning about to understand. What does it mean to honor your parents? Or the Rebbe says, there's also, within the 7 laws, there's concepts that then there's more and more details or aspects that if someone's really immersed in Torah, they've got to study. Like, for example, as Maimonides speaks, to know of the existence of God, to really know of the existence of God, which of course is a very deep topic, But obviously, that's a topic the Noahide should study, because the Noahide is supposed to negate any idolatrous relationship. So if God clearly says the Noahide can't worship any idol, that means the Noahide has an incumbency, or definitely could, study anything about God that's going to express the reality of God and therefore the negation of idolatry. And the Rebbe says another example of a whole broad spectrum of things a Noachide can and should study is anything that has to do with proper moral behavior, the uprooting of any negative traits, like the Rebbe says, for example, anger. So where does it say a Noachide can't be angry? Well, if you understand how God wants a moral good person to live, you understand God doesn't want you to indulge in anger. So that means the part of Torah that's discussing your emotional balance, anything that has to do with refinement of character, obviously God would want the Noachide to study that. Because obviously that's how a moral, godly Noachide would live. So again, do you have to? You can't say you have to. If you accept God, reject idolatry, and keep the basic 7 laws, you are a Noachide. But there's so much more, the Rebbe is saying. Work on your whole inner character is a whole other aspect of deepening your relationship to God, of becoming closer and closer to Him. And anything of Torah that discusses this is obviously something of Torah that God would want the Noachide to study, because that's how they become a more moral, ethical, more godly person. Or the Rebbe says, like another example, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, is charity. You could say, well, where exactly am I required? Okay, so the sages pull out which of the 7 Noachide laws tells you're supposed to give charity. But bottom line is, it's a very important tenet of being a Noachide is giving charity. So whatever is written, the laws, the concepts, the philosophy, the theology, anything that helps you give more charity, the Noachide can and should study. Or like I mentioned before, honoring your parents. Any of these things that might seem a little bit extension of being a Noachide, no, God wants you to do this. God wants you to cover your hair. God demands that you give charity. God demands that you honor your parents. God wants you to refine your character traits. So any part of Torah that's discussing any of these things, even the Rebbe is saying an understanding of God's reality. That's deep levels of Torah. But the Rebbe says, but if it,
Sophia?
yes, Danielle.
Oh, I'm sorry. So with what you just said, are there parts of Torah that you would say, or that the Rebbe said, is completely off limits for non-Jews?
For sure. Of course, there are many
Okay.
parts of Torah that are off limits. For example, the study of Chumash. If you're just opening up a Chumash, the Torah, just to study Torah and its commentary. So it says that a Noachide can study the first 2 parshios, the first 2 Torah portions of Bereshis and Noach, Genesis and Noah, because those are Bereshis is creation, so that relates to the Noachide, and Noah is about Noah and the flood and mankind. But after that, after those first 2 Torah portions, yeah, Noachide shouldn't be opening up and studying Torah with commentary, because that's not relating to them, except of course for those specific areas within Torah that relate to their laws. In Talmud, besides those areas of Talmud that relate to the Noachide, or even as the Rebbe is saying, they're sort of expanding the parameters of what relates to the Noachide. But if you can't find a way that this relates to the Noachide, like let's say the laws of Shabbos, a Noachide shouldn't study the laws of Shabbos. It's not relating to them. So that means the Noachide shouldn't study the practical laws of Shabbos. The Noachide shouldn't study the Talmudic discussions on Shabbos. Not relating to them. But there's so much, what the Rebbe is showing you is there's so much. If you might not think of it that way, like the Rebbe is saying, you might not think a Noachide should study about God's reality. The Rebbe says, what are you talking about? If a Noachide has to reject idolatry, the Noachide has to understand God. And therefore, even though it's a very deep concept, but the existence of God is something a Noachide should study. But I'm saying conversely, the laws of Sabbath or the laws of kosher, Noachide shouldn't study. But continuing this idea, let's say the laws of modesty. Great, of course Noachide should study that. You could say, but not every law is applicable. True, but there's enough that is applicable, and studying the laws will sensitize you to what God wants from you, so therefore you can study all the laws. You see, it's sort of like if you're looking at something, you're saying, but wait, why am I studying these laws? I'm not obligated by all of them. True, but there is a general obligation. And therefore, as you study them, it will sensitize you to modesty and to how much God wants modesty and to God's vision of modesty. And therefore, It's a great thing for a Noahide to study all those laws. So anything that could have a connection to what Noahides are responsible for, or like we spoke before, in deep philosophical things, trusting God. So Lubavitch Rebbe says clearly that the same way we know there's a principle in Jewish thought, trust creates reality. The Rebbe says that applies for Noahide the same way it applies for Jews. So therefore, anything written in Jewish philosophy or Jewish theology about trusting God, all that is relevant to a Noahide. So many Jews study something called Chovos HaLevavos, duties of the heart. Within duties of the heart, a section called the gate of trust. That's a very popular thing for someone to study if they're working on their trust. So based on what the Lubavitch Rebbe is saying, a Noahide can study that. You could say, duties of the heart, the gate of trust. This is like Jewish philosophy. What does this have to do with me? The Rebbe says trust is applicable for Noahide. So therefore, anything that has to do with helping you trust is applicable for Noahide. The Rebbe says a Noahide is supposed to pray to God. So anything written about prayer is applicable for Noahide. So that's your like parameter. Can you study all in any of Torah? Absolutely not. But anything that has to do with your service, even if it might seem like it's not like first degree, it might seem second degree, but anything that really ultimately could help your service, the Rebbe is saying go for it. Wear that crown of Torah. Be immersed in Torah. Study more. Don't feel, oh, well, studying Torah is not obligatory for Noahide. True, it's not. It's not. It's not obligatory for Noahide. But the Rebbe is saying the more you study Torah, you could be like that high priest. You could be wearing that crown of Torah. You could be immersed in Torah. But yes, only those areas that are relevant to the Noahide. And the Noahide should not study areas of Torah that are not relevant. But I think based on what the Rebbe is saying, there's enough to keep us busy with all the things that are relevant. It's sort of like the Rebbe says about women and men. The Rebbe says, if a man, chair time within Jews, if a Jewish man would only learn the things a Jewish woman needs to know, in my words, that would be awesome. You know, he'd be very, very, very busy studying Torah if he only limited himself to the things a Jewish woman needs to know. So similarly, you know, if a Noahide only limit themselves to the things a Noahide needs to know, they can study a lot of Torah. In another place, this was 1988. Previous two pieces I quoted to you from 1985. The Rebbe says, Hasidus. Hasidus is spirituality. Hasidic thought is the spiritual dimension of Torah. The Rebbe says, a Noahide can study Hasidus. You say, Hasidus, this is deep, deep, godly stuff. What in the world does it have to do with a Noahide? The Rebbe says, a Noahide is supposed to have a relationship with God. Hasidus helps you have a relationship with God. Like Danielle would come to my Tanya class when she lived in Chicago and it was in person. And she was one of my star students. I would give weekly homework assignments and she did them amazingly. Remember, Danielle?
Of course I do. I miss them very much. Of course I do. Yes.
So that's Hasidus. So what in the world does a Noahide have to do with Hasidus? If you look at the obligations of a Noahide, you know, basically live a moral, ethical life. Now we're suddenly talking about deep spiritual things. But the Rebbe says a Noahide is supposed to have a relationship with God. Hasidus is enhancing your relationship with God. So if a Noahide is supposed to have a relationship with God, and Hasidus helps make real God, helps inspire you in a relationship with God, a Noahide can learn Hasidus. So now suddenly there's this huge, vast body of Torah thought that the Rebbe is saying is relevant to the Noahide. Very radical thing the Rebbe is saying, that a Noahide can learn Hasidus. So the Rebbe is referring to an incident that happened with his predecessor, with his father-in-law, that once a professor, a non-Jewish professor, asked the Rebbe, in the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, a very deep question in theology, and the Rebbe instructed that he should be taught ideas in Hasidus to answer those questions. So the Rebbe says, we see from here that you can teach Hasidus to a Noahide. Why would a Noahide want to learn Hasidus? Because they want a deeper relationship with God. They want a truer relationship with God. They want God even more real in their life. They want God to embrace every aspect of how they look at the world. Does a Noahide have to learn Hasidus? Not at all. We are total legit doing all the stuff you got to do Noahide without it. But you could. So I think what the Rebbe is showing here is two things. One is how high a Noahide could go. You know, it's not like, oh, I'm a Noahide. I'm so limited. There's so little I can do as a Noahide. They're saying, hello? You could be like the high priest. Hello, you can study a lot of Torah. Hello, you could be wearing the crown of Torah. Hello, you could be learning Chassidus. There's loads you could be doing. And also the Rebbe is showing that within Noahides, there's many options. And it's not that one delegitimizes the other. It's not that because one Noahide is spending 3 hours a day studying Torah, it means the other person who accepts God, rejects idolatry, and keeps the laws and lives his regular life. It's not that that person's not a Noahide. They are a Noah, and they're doing great stuff. But the Rebbe is saying, look how much more you could do. You could literally be a Noahide living a messianic life. By the redemption, everybody's going to be living this type of life. You could be living it now. It's late. I'm just going to do one more piece. Speaks in Torah about the idea of translating Torah to all the languages of the world. And it doesn't just mean the legalistic Torah or the scriptures. It means also the deepest depth of Hasidic thought. All of that can and should be translated in all the languages. And when we do this, we're refining the languages. And obviously, as people study these thoughts in their language, like you don't have to learn Hebrew and Aramaic to be able to study Hasidic thought. Don't worry, it's in English, and it's in French, and it's in many, many other languages. And when people are studying in French or Spanish or Portuguese or Italian, and they're studying these deep Hasidic thoughts or other parts of Torah, they're taking that language and they're refining it. They're bringing another piece of the world closer to God. And this is all moving toward the advent of the redemption, because it says then that the whole world is going to be talking about God. The whole world is going to be studying God. It says in Tzfanya, then I will transform the nation, that they'll have now a purity of language for all of them to call out to God, for all of them to serve God together as one. So when people already from the nations in their native language are studying these concepts and are calling out to God with a pure language, the Rebbe says, you're doing messianic stuff. You're bringing the redemption. You're hastening the redemption by living the redemption. So the Rebbe is saying, look how important and powerful this work is. It's not only you could. The Rebbe is saying, look how special it is when you do. So I was very inspired by all these pieces. I was like, oh my gosh, I really want to teach this, because to me, it was just like the Rebbe was showing in so many different ways the opportunity of the Noahide to be closer and closer and closer to God, which again, isn't putting anyone on like, oh my gosh, I got to be doing more and I don't have time for this. No, it's optional. You totally don't have to do this. And yet look how close you could be to God when you. Any other questions or thoughts on this?
No, you did very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Danielle, share this all with James. I was thinking a lot about James when I was preparing this.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Thank you.
I know he studies a lot of Torah, so I was like, oh, okay.
Yes, thank God. Yeah.
All
It's a
right.
very relative topic for all of us, for people who are just starting and people who have been studying Torah for years. It's an important topic and we all need to understand it.
No, to me, it was just so unbelievable what Dora was saying. Like the high priest, wearing the crown of Torah. Like, this sounds like wild and crazy, but the Rebbe is saying it. So, it's like.
Yeah, the crown of Torah part is obviously very interesting and beautiful to hear. And not that I'm trying to be a selfish person, but it feels like a lot of really interesting things happened in 1985, and that was the year I was born.
Oh, wow.
So I really feel connected to that. When you say, like, every time you say, the Rebbe said this in 1985, I'm like, wow, I don't know. There's just because it's my birth year, I'm just like, wow.
Well,
I love it.
Connected. It's not a joke. It's all connected. Obviously, if the Rebbe kept speaking about this, then that means there were changes. It was very clear. It's very clear with the Rebbe, like this heightened intensity in Mashiach and this heightened intensity in the Noahide. It was really like two very clear parallel movements. And definitely 1985 was a very strong year in terms of ideas about the Noahide, and obviously that parallel, like the Rebbe is seeing the world moving toward Mashiach very strongly, because Noahides are the world. When the world accepts God, that's Mashiach. So yeah, 1985 was a critical year, and Danielle came on the scene. God said she's going to be a player. She's going to be a player. She's going to help make it happen. Okay. Natalie?
I was just going to say tonight's class is really nice because it feels like the tough part about being a Noahide or so far has kind of felt like God is more at arm's length. So this is kind of encouraging, like, no, he doesn't have to be.
Right. Exactly. And do it his way, not making up your own way, but doing it his way and not, and yes. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I'm intrigued by the book you recommended, Duties of the Heart
Duties
and
of the heart, the section
Gate of
called the
Trust.
Gate of Trust. Yes.
I'm going to find it.
I
Absolutely.
made note of
It
that
just came out with the
too.
New English translation. And it's a very popular thing that many Jews study because everyone's working on trusting God.
Hmm.
That's like the key to so much of our life. So yes, it's definitely
Thank
something
you.
I need to study that very much.
Okay.
So thank you. Thank you.
Go
Thank
for it.
you.
Go for it. There's also, book that of the Rebbe's collections on trust, which I would also recommend. There's a book called In Good Hands. It's published by the publishing company called Sichos, Sichos, Sichos in English, In Good Hands. And I recommend that. I've bought and given many copies. I mean, not many, but several copies of that work because it's a really nice collection. It's 100 different ideas of the Rebbe on trust in English. I highly recommend it.